Chapter 14, Part 3. So we're reviewing a little bit here on the Aegean. So Cycladic art, Minoan art, and Mycenaean art. So our Cycladic figures, I'm going to back up. They're very tall and minimalistic. Here, very abstracted and slender, with painted decoration, which we don't really have any with the actual paint still on them. Most of the artwork in the Minoan culture revolves around the palace at Knossos, and then Mycenaean art is typically made out of gold. So they have elaborate burial practices, use of gold, much like Egyptians may do. All right, so this is our view of the Aegean Sea here and a variety of islands, some of which maybe you've heard of. So Crete is what we now call this island. Palace of Knossos is here, and Island of Rhodes. You may have heard of a Rhodes scholar or Rhodesian. That's originally, well, Rhodesia is a different country, but Rhodes is our initial island here. Athens, Marathon, where we get the Marathon from. Mount Parnassus, these other areas, Mount Olympus, right? So things to do with the Olympics in Greece. This is mainland Greece here. This is the Peloponnesus island here. It's not quite an island, it's a peninsula because it's connected. Corinth, Cyclades, so that's where the Cycladic art comes from. So the classical world refers to these two cultures around the year zero, and a bigger window than that, but that's where you might want to land. So it's aesthetically the work is the highest quality and most realistic and thoughtful artwork in terms of the human body, but also a lot of different art forms get developed at this time. Of course, math and science and all this other stuff is evolving as well in literature, but we're looking at visual art. So Greek philosophers were first to speculate on the nature and purpose of art, really kind of start to think about aesthetics, and then sculpture and painting and architecture were discussed as techne, meaning things requiring a special body of knowledge to skill to make. So these three things are revered highly, and then we see this back into the Renaissance, and that goes for quite a long time, the Renaissance, almost into the 20th century. These three art forms become the biggest focus. So techne, we cover this, and a crater is a vessel for wine. We'll look at one moving through. So we have an archaic period in Greece. We have three periods in Greece. We have the archaic, we have the classical, and then we have the Hellenistic. So the archaic period is the 6th century BC, so 600 years before the year zero. And it's got some Greek forms called the kouros, which looks very similar to Egyptian art. The kore is a female maiden. We don't see a lot of these. Mostly the youth or a boy, athleticism. That's the ideal of a male figure. Okay, we don't see that many nude females. An amphora is a storage vessel, and then we see the red figure style with slip, and we'll look at that a little more closely. Okay, so a kouros here is a Greek youth or boy, and look how stiff this guy is. And he's very similar to our figures from Egypt around this, same time and earlier, 580 BC. This is life size, so he's 6'4", might be a little bit exaggerated. But notice how he's got this ultra slender waist and not a lot of detail in the musculature here. Everything is stylized. These kneecaps are kind of a strange design. There's a hard line coming down here off the shin. The hair is highly stylized. The eyes are stylized. So not a lot of reality here. Some stiff figure. He does have 1 foot forward. We do see this in Egyptian art. A little more stone carved out, because a lot of times with Egyptian art, we have the stone that it is carved out of maintained in the sculpture, and we don't have air or light coming through these areas. It's filled in. Okay, so what the shift of the focus is here is from the eternal world and tomb culture, and we're getting away from that. The Greeks don't build tombs in the way that the Egyptians do at all. little, they still have tombs, but it's very different, small scale. And the idea that the athletic human form is the ideal as opposed to um, more of an idealized sort of stoic or staid form or a royal personage. So this is an amphora here. Has another title as well. Yeah, okay, so our amphora here has these handles. So this is made in a workshop. We know the names of these peoples, and Andokides, the painter. So we know who the painter on the surface is, and we know all these different workshops. Thousands and thousands of these were made, and we have a lot of them. Partly to do with this and the next thing we're going to look at from shipwrecks. Okay, so say these were going to go off to Rome or Egypt or wherever they're going across the Mediterranean, and their storm came or whatever battle happened, and the ship was sunk. Then later they were found, and also they were well preserved and used throughout time. So this one is the red figure, what we call red figure. There's also black figure, but what this is a orange or red colored clay. The whole thing is red clay. That's what they're using, and then they paint black slip over most of it. They paint around the edges of the figures with the black, and then they go back in and do some details with black, the little edging around there. But all this is painted on here, and multiple people would be working on one base. So now we're going to get into the classical period from 480 to 523 BC. Now I know it sounds strange that we would have these exact dates, but there's so much of this work, and it was well preserved. Greece wasn't conquered in a violent way. The Romans, when they took over, were very respectful of the Greeks, and they really borrowed a lot from them. So most of the work was maintained or preserved. Yes and no. Okay, so Athens is the cultural center and artistic center of its time at this point in time. So this is the classical period, and the Greeks invent the contrapposto stance, and bronze was a favored material for sculpture. Now, bronze is a favored material, but this is the one of the very, very few bronzes we have left from Greece. Part of the reason that the reason this exists is that it was sunk in a shipwreck, and then it was pulled up in the 1970s, 2,000 plus years later, and preserved and cleaned up. There's still a little bit of scale. You can see some of that being underneath water for 2,000 years affected it somewhat. But bronze is an amazing material. It's very resilient. There are slightly different formulas for bronze, but if you do it right, which the Greeks did, the Romans did, this stuff lasts forever. Now, bronze is more flexible, has more tensile strength, so you see how he doesn't need to be attached to stone anymore. He can have a realistic gap between his legs. We can have some negative space. Yes, these do occasionally break, and we are missing something like a staff that he held in his hand and so on, but for the most part, they stay pretty well intact. But what happened is, after this time period, and you get into the Roman Empire and beyond, most of these gorgeous bronzes were melted down for weaponry. That's why we lose them more so than anything else. The shift in focus changes from cultural and artistic to warlike, and a lot of the artwork is lost. Okay, so that's the historical aspect. We're looking at the contrapposto stance. So we have this curvature here of his leg. There's more weight on this leg, less weight on this leg. So when we do that, there's sort of an S curve that happens here, and we kind of see it this way. So the shoulder drops a little bit. Sometimes you see a little bit more of a drop in the shoulder. I'm sorry, I'm getting left and right mixed up here. Anyway, but you get an engagement of muscles, and you'll see this even more in Hellenistic. The musculature starts to get described. We see a lot of muscles in his torso. Of course, we call these our abs or our six-pack nowadays, but that was highly revered 2,000 plus years ago in Greece. The athletes were the ideal form of human. Humans are important, not as much. Gods are important, but humans, to emulate gods, want to look as fit as possible. This also shows that this person is intelligent and has many other moral characteristics by being fit. So we sort of believe that still today. If you think about that bias, it's true that we've held on to that. He is in the nude because he is an athlete, or a warrior in this case, and battles in some cases, but more to the point of athletes, are competing in the nude. They're wrestling in the nude. If you go back to these guys here, these guys are naked. They're wrestlers, and there's some other wrestling matches going on. Not too sure on the details, but all the time when the Olympics are happening, when sports are happening, people are naked, and sometimes they're oiled down in the case of wrestling, so they can't grab each other. Okay, so his hair is still a little stylized here, a little overly curly, but for the most part, it's a very realistic figure. Okay, so the last period is called the Hellenistic period, and this begins in 323 BC, and this is emphasized by balance and restraint, by also showing dynamic poses and extreme emotion. So we have movement here. So theatrical quality and complex poses. So we have our Aphrodite of Melos, the Venus de Milo. Remember, Venus and Aphrodite are the same person. So Aphrodite is the Greek, translates into Venus in the Latin for the Roman Empire. So you can see the S curve a little bit more predominantly here. See how the shoulders dropped? And then her leg is bent and it kind of goes like this. So we have this S curve coming across here. Her body, her torso is turning a little bit. Musculature here. Unusual to have a nude or even semi-nude female, but she is the Aphrodite. She's the goddess of love. So we went ahead and showed her semi-clothed. Usually when you see figures of ancient Greece of women, they're completely clothed, heavy drapery such as this down here. The Laocoon group, oh my goodness, so exciting, so emotional. Look at his face. We don't see this until now, until the Hellenistic period, where there's this heavy emotional expression, twisting musculature. Look at all that vein that goes down there to the arm. They're all bulging. His muscles, the leg muscles. Everything is very accurate and well done. These are his two sons. Now, that is a little odd when you look at them. They're kind of like miniature men, as opposed to having a slightly larger head as a kid some will do. And they're also in the nude, but they were at a temple, and Poseidon says, no, you're on the Trojan side. I'm going to let the Greeks win, and lets him become devoured by the serpent. Very exciting piece. Now, this is a Roman copy of a Greek original. So the Romans take over during the Hellenistic period, and they admire all the sculpture greatly. So this was more than likely copied from a bronze that the Greeks made. So you can imagine, remember our other guy here, the race warrior, he was on his way to Italy. He was found outside Italy. Okay, outside in race Italy, right? So you imagine a bronze version of this piece was in Italy at some point in time in Rome, and then it was carved and copied into marble. Somebody took the time to do that, and then the bronze was lost, and this is what we have. So original was in bronze. It was Greek, Hellenistic. Then the Romans copy it in marble. So Rome era begins 500 BC, and it overlaps the Greeks, and the Romans just admire the Greeks, and they copy so much from them. They keep their religion, they keep a lot of their ideas and their politics, all kinds of things, and then they kind of go a little further with it. So Roman art tends more toward realism instead of this idealistic youthful figure. We're going to get more into that. So the portrait bust